everybody. Welcome to Unit 7 of MOOC Indonesia 101. In this unit, we are going to discuss about the continuation of the previous unit, which was about the Indonesian political dynamics under Sukarno's period. Now, in this unit, we are going to move on to the next period in the Indonesian politics, which is the New Order era. So we start with the first slide. So the period of Soeharto's presidency lasts for 32 years, which started from 1966 to 1998. It is the longest presidential term in the history of Indonesia. President Soeharto named his regime as the New Order. The term was used to contrast his rule with that of his predecessor, whose regime was dubbed the Old Order or Order Lama. Some characteristics of the New Order regime are the suppression of the left and the political use of Pancasila as a state ideology. So we start with the suppression of the left. The demonization of the PKI, or the Indonesian Communist Party, and the left-leaning thoughts was an important marker of the New Order's regime. The banning of the Communist Party and the widespread massacres and imprisonment of its members and supposed sympathizers in the wake of the 30 September 1965 incident marked the end of Sukarno's presidency and the ascendancy of Soeharto. Soeharto stayed in power for 32 years. The estimated number of those killed in the massacres of late 1965 and early 1966 varies, but a minimum of 500,000 people were killed at this time by their fellow citizens and the Indonesian army under Soeharto's control. Some sources argue that as many as 1 million lives may have been taken. According to the official New Order history, the PKI was the mastermind of the 30th September 1965 movement, or the abortive coup attempt in which 6 generals were captured and killed by members of Sukarno's presidential guard. In this way, responsibility for the events which followed was shifted home to the victims, as was made clear in the official New Order term for the 30 September movement, or it is called Gestapo, or G30S PKI. The denunciation of the PKI and left-leaning thoughts and the attempt to maintain a fear of communism in Indonesia resulted in the propagation of the so-called Bahaya latent communism, or latent dangers of communism dogma. Shortly after the murder of the generals, the strategy of demonization was already in train, and the accounts of how the generals were killed were already spread. Army-controlled media, which dominated the press and radio broadcast at the time, emphasized the brutality of the killings. However, as Anderson later found, there were a disjunction between Army's own autopsy reports and the details of the murders as they were described in the media. The state-sponsored construction of the brutality of PKI particularly applied to the image of Gerwani, or Indonesia Women's Movement, which is the PKI's women's organization. The New Order regime created a myth that members of Gerwani had engaged in sexual perversion at the scene of the murder of the generals. As Saskia Wirenga argues, the myth was created as part of the construction of Soeharto as the savior of the nation, the man who restored order and stability. In doing so, the new regime constructed a male-dominated gender ideology in which the ideal woman was imagined to be submissive and docile in the face of male domination and authority. The supposed threat of communism was used by New Order to condemn ideas, organization, and books which were openly critical of the regime. One example was the ban imposed on the work of the internationally renowned author Pramudia Anantatur, active as a radical nationalist writer during the revolution and an editor of the cultural section of the newspaper called Bintang Timur in the early 1960s. Pramudia was imprisoned shortly after the events of 30 September 1965. Although he was released from prison in 1979, his freedom of speech and movement remained limited up until the end of the New Order period. Many observers believed that it was not the alleged leftist ideology which was the cause of the bans on Pramudia's books. Rather, it was the challenges they posed to the New Order's version of Indonesian history. The New Order's attempt to spread its single version of history and an essentialist view of Indonesian identity were also appeared in its interpretation and propagation of the Pancasila as state ideology. Pancasila was utilized to ban alternative ideologies in the name of order and stability. Now we move on to the second characteristic of the New Order regime, which is the political use of Pancasila as state ideology. Pancasila, we have already discussed in the previous unit, the 5 principles of the Indonesian state, was a pillar of the New Order regime. Considered to be the primary principles of the Indonesian worldview, the regime asserted that Pancasila should be practiced in a pure, quote-unquote, and consistent, quote-unquote, or in Bahasa Indonesia it is called murni dan konsekuen manner. Soeharto's rhetorical determination to base his rule on this particular application of Pancasila's basic tenets and the 1945 Constitution was a defining characteristic of his leadership. Drawing on the Sukarno's identification of Western liberal democracy as a contributing factor to the political chaos of the early post-independence period, the New Order based its claims to legitimacy on the maintenance of political stability and the purity of Pancasila. There were a number of methods used to solidify the role of Pancasila during Soeharto's presidency. This included the Pancasila indoctrination program and the obligation on all organizations to adopt Pancasila as their sole ideological basis. Okay. And then we move on to the next slide. Yeah. Okay. So an important marker of this indoctrination program was the incorporation of Pancasila as a subject in the school curriculum. Beginning in 1985, a course, or it is called an upgrading course called P4, which stands for Pedoman Pengayatan dan Pengembangan Pancasila, or it can be roughly translated as Guide to Understanding and Implementation of Pancasila, was made compulsory for students in junior and senior high schools, higher educational institutions, as well as for civil servants. Prior to the introduction of the course, Pendidikan Moral Pancasila or Pancasila Moral Education had been taught in primary and secondary schools. The wide scope of the subjects indicated the regime's determination to make Pancasila as a major political tool of the new order government. Unlike the ways Pancasila was used under Soekarno as ideological justification for anti-imperialism, Michael Morfitt argues that the New Order regime emphasized the static character of the political ideology. Whereas Soekarno urged the population to stop romanticizing the revolution of 1945 to 1949 and look confidently to the future, taking part with other formerly colonized nations in struggle against colonialism and imperialism, Pancasila indoctrination under Soeharto's rule promoted more inward-looking views and political conservatism. In line with Soeharto's attempt to use Pancasila as an instrument to maintain stability and order, all political and social organizations were obliged to adopt Pancasila as the sole ideological basis of their activities. This meant the annihilation of alternative political ideologies in the public sphere. An indicator of New Order success in implementing the concept was the endorsement of the only state-approved Muslim party at that time, which was the P3, or Partai Persatuan Pembangunan, or the United Development Party. The formation of the party in 1973 symbolized the control which the regime now exercised over Islamic organizations. In amalgamating the four Muslim parties, namely Nahdlatul Ulama, Partai Muslimin Indonesia, Syarikat Islam, and PERTI into a single party, and appointing personnel loyal to the regime as the party's leaders and administrators, the new order indicated its determination to prevent the development of any political opposition based on Islam. The name of the new party even did not even suggest that it was an Islamic party. Questions were raised by other Muslim organizations and figures regarding the adoption of Pancasila as the party's ideological basis. They asked whether or not a party could claim to be an Islamic party if its basic principles were Pancasila instead of Islamic principles. In the 1980s, the issue of Pancasila as a sole ideology raised debates among Muslim groups. They correctly viewed the concept as designed to subordinate Islamic voices in the political sphere and strengthen the secular basis of the state. Syafruddin Prawira Negara, a Muslim politician from Soekarno era, expressed his opposition to the concept by stating that Pancasila was initially intended as the foundation of the state and constitution, not party and organization. He further argued that each citizen of Indonesia had a right to preserve his or her religious identity and the religious principles he or she adhered to, be they Islamic, Christian, Buddhist, and Hindu principles. The fact that the opposition to the imposition of Pancasila as a single ideological basis for social and political organization did not only come from Muslims but also from Christians suggested that the main issue was not Pancasila itself, but the ways the state was intervening in the socio-political affairs of society. The demonization of the PKI and the imposition of Pancasila as a sole ideological basis of political life and organizations illustrated the autocratic and monolithic character of the New Order regime. Under Soeharto, the presence of healthy political dynamics and heterogeneous political aspirations was seen as harmful to the nation's order and stability. Okay, so I think that's the end of Unit 7, and I think by watching the video, I hope you will be understanding more about the official standpoint of the state regarding political Islam. So we have already discussed in the previous units that the characteristics of political Islam in Indonesia tend to be moderate. And I think the discussion about Islam under Soeharto's regime affirms this notion. Okay, thank you for watching the video, and we meet again in Unit 9. Thank you. Bye.